Welcome to Chronological Fiction, where real-world events meet the power of storytelling. We're here to breathe new life into history's most interesting moments by turning them into unique narratives. Join our community by subscribing, and let's explore the stories that shaped our world.
The abyss does not forgive, and it certainly does not forget. 5,000 feet below the rolling sapphire surface of the Gulf of Mexico, the Mississippi Canyon Block 252 held a secret, a pocket of ancient pressurized rage known to the engineers of Transocean and BP as the Macondo Prospect. By April 2010, the Deepwater Horizon, a massive semi-submersible drilling rig, sat atop this invisible titan like a dragonfly perched on a landmine. This is not merely a story of mechanical failure, but a chronicle of human hubris clashing with the primordial forces of the deep earth. The silence of the deep sea is a heavy physical weight, a realm where pressures reach 2,200 pounds per square inch. And it was into this dark sanctuary that the drill bit finally bit too deep. The Deepwater Horizon was a marvel of modern engineering, a floating city the size of 2 football fields, held in place by satellite-controlled thrusters that fought the ocean currents with surgical precision. But beneath the gleaming white steel and the rhythmic thrum of the generators, a catastrophe was being brewed in the dark. The well was from hell, as the workers called it. The rock formations were unstable, the pressure readings were erratic, and the schedule was weeks behind. In the boardroom, time was money. In the mudroom, pressure was life. The tension on the rig was palpable, a static charge in the salt air that whispered of a coming storm. The nightmare began with a whisper of gas. On the evening of April 20th, the crew was performing what they thought was a routine series of tests to seal the well for temporary abandonment. They were pumping cement 5,000 feet down to create a plug that would hold back the millions of years of accumulated methane and oil. But the cement was weak, aerated by the very gas it was meant to contain. Deep in the throat of the earth, the Macondo well began to kick. A bubble of methane, compressed by the immense pressure of the deep, began to expand as it rose through the drilling pipe. Like a diver getting the bends, the gas grew larger and more violent as it raced toward the surface. A silent ghost climbing a 5,000-foot ladder. In the control room, the dials began to dance. A sudden surge in pressure signaled that the mud, the heavy fluid used to keep the well under control, was being pushed out by something much stronger. On the drill floor, the men saw a terrifying sight, a geyser of thick, brown drilling mud erupting through the rotary table, raining down on the steel deck like a foul summer storm. This was the moment the earth exhaled. The kick had become a blowout. The methane bubble had reached the rig, expanding 1,000-fold, screaming through the pipes with the force of a jet engine. The first explosion was not a bang, but a roar. The gas, having found its way into the rig's air intakes, ignited within the massive diesel generators. The heart of the ship exploded. High-voltage lines snapped, plunging the corridors into a flickering, red-lit hell. Men were thrown from their bunks by a shockwave that felt like a tectonic plate snapping. The air was instantly replaced by a thick, oily smoke that tasted of copper and death. On the bridge, the captain fought to maintain control, but the Deepwater Horizon was no longer a ship. It was a torch. To understand the scale of the horror, one must look at the blowout preventer, BOP. This 5-story, 400-ton stack of valves and rams sat on the ocean floor, designed to be the final line of defense. It was the kill switch. In the event of a disaster, massive steel shears were supposed to fire, cutting through the drill pipe and sealing the well like a guillotine. But the pipe had buckled under the pressure of the rising oil. When the emergency signal finally reached the seabed, the shears bit into the steel but could not close. The throat of the earth remained wide open, and the black blood of the Macondo began to pour into the pristine blue waters of the Gulf. On the rig, the survival instinct took over. The lifeboats were launched into a sea that was already beginning to shimmer with an oily sheen. Some men, trapped by the flames, were forced to jump from the heights of the deck. A 60-foot plunge into the dark, churning water below. Behind them, the Deepwater Horizon was a towering inferno, a pillar of fire that could be seen from space. The heat was so intense it melted the very steel of the derrick, bending the massive structure like wax. 11 men would never leave that rig, their spirits claimed by the fire and the deep in the first moments of the cataclysm. As the sun rose over the Gulf the following morning, the world woke to a new reality. The Deepwater Horizon, after burning for 36 hours, finally succumbed to its wounds. With a long metallic groan that sounded like a dying whale, the rig slipped beneath the waves, trailing a shroud of smoke and fire. It settled on the seabed, a twisted wreck of shattered ambition. But the sinking was only the beginning. The well was still screaming. Without the weight of the rig to provide even a semblance of counter-pressure, the oil began to gush from the broken pipe at a rate that defied calculation. The months that followed were a masterclass in desperation. The ocean floor became a battlefield of robots. Remotely operated vehicles, ROVs, their lights flickering like fireflies in the eternal dark, buzzed around the broken BOP, trying to find a way to plug the leak. The world watched in morbid fascination as the live oil cam broadcast the relentless dark plume of the Macondo, a black ribbon of poison unspooling into the deep. Every attempt to stop it, the top hat, the junk shot, the top kill, failed. The pressure was too great. The abyss was too deep. The oil was a living thing, cold and heavy, coating the deep-sea corals and the breeding grounds of the bluefin tuna. The ecological toll was a slow-motion tragedy. The oil reached the marshlands of Louisiana and the white sands of Florida, turning the vibrant green wetlands into a black, sticky graveyard. Pelicans, their feathers matted with crude, sat motionless on the shore, a silent indictment of human greed. Beneath the surface, the dispersants, millions of gallons of chemicals sprayed to break up the oil, created a toxic underwater haze. The very fabric of the Gulf's life cycle was being torn apart, from the microscopic plankton to the great sperm whales that navigated the deep canyons. Finally, after 87 days, the static kill and the completion of a relief well brought a hollow victory. A heavy cap was bolted onto the wellhead, and for the first time in 3 months, the gushing stopped. The silence returned to the Mississippi Canyon, but it was a different kind of silence. The Macondo was sealed with cement and steel, a tomb for the dreams of the men who worked the horizon. But the oil remained. It drifted in vast, submerged plumes, it settled in the sediment of the deep floor, and it lingered in the DNA of the creatures that survived. The legacy of the Deepwater Horizon is not written in the court settlements or the corporate apologies, but in the scars on the seabed. By the year 2026, the wreck of the rig has become a strange, artificial reef, encrusted with the very life it once threatened. But the fire in the minds of those who were there still burns. They remember the smell of the methane, the roar of the explosion, and the sight of the black water rising. They know that the abyss is still there, 5,000 feet down, waiting for the next time humanity forgets that some things are meant to stay buried in the dark. The ocean is a vast memory, and the Deepwater Horizon is a dark chapter that will never be fully closed. It stands as a testament to the fact that when we reach into the earth to take its treasures, we must be prepared for the earth to reach back. The fire may be out, and the well may be capped, but the pressure, that ancient, relentless pressure of the deep, is always there, whispering against the steel, waiting for the smallest crack to begin the nightmare all over again. The Deepwater Horizon was not just a ship. It was a psychological anchor for the men and women who lived in the rhythm of the drill. To continue this chronicle, we must look at the immediate aftermath of the sinking, the moment the surface fire died and the silent subterranean war began. When the rig slipped beneath the waves on April 22nd, it left behind a vacuum of authority and a physical wound in the earth that no one knew how to stitch closed. The pressure at the wellhead was a staggering 13,000 pounds per square inch, a force so violent that it began to erode the very steel of the broken riser pipe, turning the escaping oil and sand into a high-velocity liquid sandpaper that widened the leak by the hour. By early May, the Gulf of Mexico had become a laboratory of desperation. The engineers turned to a solution they called the top hat, a 100-ton concrete and steel containment dome designed to be lowered over the main leak to funnel the oil to a tanker on the surface. It was a masterpiece of hurried construction, but it failed to account for the strange physics of the deep. At 5,000 feet, the cold temperature and the high pressure caused the methane gas to combine with seawater, forming methane hydrates. slushy, ice-like crystals that were lighter than water. Within hours of being lowered, the top hat became clogged with this frozen gas, turning the massive dome into a giant buoy that floated away from the leak, useless and mocking. The failure of the top hat shifted the strategy to top kill, a brutal attempt to overpower the well by sheer force. The plan was to pump heavy drilling mud into the blowout preventer at twice the pressure of the rising oil, essentially pushing the dragon back into its cave. For 3 days, the world held its breath as the live oil cam showed the struggle. The dark plume would turn grey as the mud hit it, then brown, then black again as the earth pushed back. The Macondo was too strong. The pressure from the reservoir was so immense that it simply ejected the mud, along with junk shots, shredded tires and golf balls, intended to plug the gaps. The earth refused to be gagged. As the summer of 2010 dragged on, the chemical warfare began. To prevent the oil from reaching the beaches, over 1.8 million gallons of Corexit 9500 were pumped directly into the oil stream at the seabed. This was unprecedented. While it broke the oil into microscopic droplets, it created a submerged toxic fog that settled into the bathypelagic zone, the midnight layer of the ocean. This layer is home to the giant squid and the deep-sea viperfish, creatures that live in a fragile equilibrium. The dispersants didn't make the oil disappear. They made it invisible, hiding the disaster beneath a shimmering blue curtain, while the deep-sea floor began to suffocate under a marine snow of oily mucus. The final psychological blow to the survivors was the static kill and the long wait for the relief wells. 2 other rigs, the Development Driller 2 and 3, were tasked with drilling a surgical path to intersect a 7-inch pipe nearly 3 miles below the seabed. It was like trying to hit a moving needle with a thread from a skyscraper during a windstorm. Every foot of progress was a battle against the formation pressure of the rock. On July 15th, 87 days after the explosion, a new capping stack was finally closed. The flow stopped. The live oil cam showed a still blue void for the first time in 3 months. The silence was deafening. But it was the silence of a tomb, not a victory. By 2026, the Macondo well remains a permanent monument of caution. It is encased in a massive cement plug that extends thousands of feet into the crust, a cork in a bottle of ancient lightning. But the seabed around the site has changed. Scientists visiting the area with submersibles have found microbial mats, giant colonies of oil-eating bacteria that have flourished in the wake of the spill. These bacteria are the ocean's cleaning crew, but their presence has altered the local oxygen levels, creating dead zones where the water is still and lifeless. The Deepwater Horizon itself lies in 2 main pieces, half buried in the silt, a rusted cathedral of steel that is slowly being reclaimed by the salt. The human story of the Horizon ended in courtrooms and settlements, but the environmental story is still being written in the tissues of the Gulf's inhabitants. The dolphins of Barataria Bay still show signs of lung disease, and the deep-sea corals, some hundreds of years old, remain blackened and brittle. The Hell's Gate may be closed, but the heat from that fire still resonates in the way we view the deep. We learned that the abyss is not just a place of water and darkness, but a reservoir of ancient energy that demands respect. The Deepwater Horizon is a ghost ship now, sailing through the memories of a generation that realized, too late, that some doors, once opened, can never be truly shut. The Deepwater Horizon was not merely a vessel. It was a psychological anchor for the men and women who lived according to the rhythmic pulse of the drill string. To continue this chronicle into the depths of its 120-minute narrative, we must look at the immediate, agonizing aftermath of the sinking. The moment the surface fire died and the silent subterranean war truly began. When the rig slipped beneath the waves on the morning of April 22nd, it left behind a vacuum of authority and a physical wound in the earth that no one, from the engineers in Houston to the survivors on the lifeboats, knew how to stitch closed. The pressure at the wellhead was a staggering 13,000 pounds per square inch, a force so violent that it began to erode the very steel of the broken riser pipe, turning the escaping mixture of oil, gas, and abrasive sand into a high-velocity liquid sandpaper that widened the leak by the hour. By early May, the Gulf of Mexico had become a global laboratory of desperation. The engineers, working from remote-controlled operations centers on the mainland, turned to a solution they called the Top Hat. This was a 100-ton concrete and steel containment dome designed to be lowered 5,000 feet down over the main leak to funnel the gushing oil to a tanker waiting on the surface. It was a masterpiece of hurried construction. A massive inverted bell meant to catch the dragon's breath. However, the engineers had failed to account for the strange alien physics of the deep. At 5,000 feet, the freezing temperature and the immense pressure caused the methane gas to combine with seawater, forming methane hydrates, slushy, ice-like crystals that were lighter than water. Within hours of being lowered, the top hat became clogged with this frozen gas, turning the massive dome into a giant, unmanageable buoy that floated away from the leak, useless and mocking. The failure of the top hat shifted the strategy to a more aggressive tactic known as top kill. This was a brutal attempt to overpower the well by sheer mechanical force. The plan was to pump heavy drilling mud, a mixture of minerals and chemicals, into the blowout preventer at twice the pressure of the rising oil, essentially trying to push the black blood back into the Earth's veins. For 3 days, the world held its breath as the live oil cam showed the struggle. The dark plume would turn grey as the mud hit it, then brown, then black again as the Macondo pushed back with a primal strength. The pressure from the reservoir was so immense that it simply ejected the mud, along with thousands of shredded tires and golf balls, the junk shot, intended to plug the gaps. It was as if the earth refused to be gagged, spitting out the debris of human industry with a roar that could be felt in the vibrations of the submersibles. As the summer of 2010 dragged on, the war transitioned into a chemical conflict. To prevent the oil from reaching the fragile tourist beaches and the vital oyster beds of the coastline, over 1.8 million gallons of a dispersant called Corexit 9500 were pumped directly into the oil stream at the seabed. This was an environmental experiment on a scale never before seen. While the chemical succeeded in breaking the oil into microscopic droplets, making it less visible on the surface, it created a submerged toxic fog that settled into the bathypelagic zone, the midnight layer of the ocean. This layer is home to the giant squid, the deep-sea viperfish, and creatures that live in a fragile, cold equilibrium. The dispersants didn't make the oil disappear, they simply hid the disaster beneath a shimmering blue curtain, while the deep-sea floor began to suffocate under a marine snow of oily mucus and dead plankton. The final psychological and technical blow to the survivors was the static kill and the agonizingly slow progress of the relief wells. 2 other rigs, the Development Driller 2 and 3, were tasked with drilling a surgical 3-mile path through the rock to intersect a 7-inch pipe at the bottom of the well. It was like trying to hit a moving needle with a thread from the top of a skyscraper during a hurricane. Every foot of progress was a battle against the formation pressure of the stone, which threatened to collapse the new holes. On July 15th, 87 days after the initial explosion, a new heavy capping stack was finally bolted onto the wellhead. The valves were closed, and for the first time in 3 months, the gushing stopped. The live oil cam showed a still blue void. The silence was deafening, but it was the silence of a tomb, not a victory celebration. By the year 2026, the Macondo well remains a permanent monument of caution and ecological change. It is encased in a massive cement plug that extends thousands of feet into the crust, a permanent cork in a bottle of ancient pressurized lightning. However, the seabed around the site has undergone a radical transformation. Scientists visiting the area with modern submersibles have discovered microbial mats, giant orange and white colonies of oil-eating bacteria that have flourished in the wake of the spill. These bacteria are the ocean's natural cleaning crew, but their massive consumption of the oil has altered the local oxygen levels, creating localized dead zones where the water is still and devoid of complex life. The Deepwater Horizon itself lies in 2 main pieces on the silt-covered floor, a rusted, collapsing cathedral of steel that is slowly being reclaimed by the salt and the pressure. The human story of the Horizon ended in years of courtrooms and billion-dollar settlements, but the environmental story is still being written in the tissues and the DNA of the Gulf's inhabitants. The dolphins of Barataria Bay still show signs of chronic lung disease, and the deep-sea corals, some hundreds of years old, remain blackened and brittle, unable to recover from the oily snow. The Hell's Gate may be capped, but the heat from that fire still resonates in the collective memory of the industry. We learned that the abyss is not just a place of water and darkness, but a reservoir of ancient energy that demands a respect we were too arrogant to provide. The Deepwater Horizon is a ghost ship now, sailing through the nightmares of a generation that realized, too late, that some doors, once opened into the deep, can never be truly shut. The silence of the Mississippi Canyon in the year 2026 is a deceptive piece, a thin veil over a landscape that was fundamentally altered by the 90 Days of Chaos in 2010. To push this narrative into its final, most immersive chapters, we must explore the subterranean aftershocks, the resurrection of the ghost rig, and the molecular legacy of the Macondo well. The story did not end when the valves were closed. It simply shifted from a battle of fire to a battle of time and chemistry. The bending of the crust. While the surface world celebrated the static kill, a different phenomenon was occurring miles beneath the sea floor. The removal of millions of barrels of oil and gas had created a pressure deficit in the rock formations. Like a balloon losing air, the layers of shale and sandstone began to settle and shift. This triggered a series of micro-seismic events, tiny earthquakes that rippled through the Gulf's crust. In the year 2026, researchers using advanced sonar mapping discovered that the seabed around the Macondo site had subsided by several meters. This movement has twisted the buried pipes of the relief wells into jagged metallic pretzels, ensuring that the Macondo is not just capped, but physically crushed by the very earth it once tried to escape. The ghost in the midnight zone, 5,000 feet down, the Deepwater Horizon rig itself has become a technological reef. In the early years, the wreck was a site of sterile mourning, but by 2026, the ocean's resilience has taken a strange turn. A species of bone-eating worms, Osedax, and specialized bacteria have begun to consume the organic coatings and the remnants of the rig's lifeboats. The derrick, once a proud finger pointing toward the sky, is now a collapsed skeleton encrusted with rusticles, fragile icicle-like structures of oxidized iron. These rusticles are slowly turning the rig into a red dust that drifts across the sea floor, a literal dissolution of the machine into the deep-sea sediment. The molecular scar, perhaps the most haunting aspect of the 120-minute chronicle, is the persistence of the oil's ghost. While the visible slicks vanished long ago, the chemical signature of the Macondo oil remains trapped in a flocculent layer on the seabed. This is a thick, dark carpet of oily marine snow that never fully biodegraded. In the 2026 surveys, scientists found that this layer has prevented the infauna, the tiny creatures that live in the mud, from returning to their ancestral homes. The food chain of the deep Gulf has been broken at its very base. The crabs and bottom dwellers that survive in this zone show melanotic lesions, dark spots on their shells that act as a permanent biological record of the toxicity that rained down upon them 16 years ago. The 2026 Requiem, a lesson in pressure. As we reach the final zenith of this narrative, we must look at the psychological pressure that remains. The Deepwater Horizon was a warning that went unheeded for too long. A reminder that when we drill into the earth, we are not just extracting a resource. We are puncturing a pressurized vessel of history. The Macondo well is now a tomb, not just for the 11 men who died, but for the era of industrial innocence. The Hell's Gate is locked behind millions of tons of cement and the weight of the entire ocean. But the pressure remains. It is a cold, calculated force that waits for the next moment of human complacency, the next time a schedule is prioritized over safety, or the next time we forget that the abyss has a memory that lasts for millions of years. The Deepwater Horizon is no longer just a rig or a disaster, it is a geological milestone. It marks the point where human technology reached its absolute limit against the primordial forces of the deep. As the ROVs of the 2026 mission pull away from the site, their lights fading into the eternal dark, they leave behind a world that is quiet, scarred, and forever changed. The Gulf of Mexico has healed on the surface, its waves still a brilliant, mocking blue. But in the dark, 5,000 feet down, the ghost of the horizon still sails, a silent sentinel over a wound that will never fully close. The final descent into the legacy of the Deepwater Horizon reveals a world where the boundary between human technology and planetary biology has completely dissolved. By the year 2026, the Mississippi Canyon Block 252 has become the site of a permanent geological and chemical transformation. This is no longer a story of an accident. It is the story of a new synthetic ecosystem born from the marriage of high-pressure hydrocarbons and industrial steel. The crystallization of the well, deep within the throat of the Macondo well, the cement plug has undergone a process known as thermal stabilization. Because the Earth's core heat continues to press upward against the seal, the cement has fused with the surrounding salt domes, creating a subterranean spear of artificial rock nearly 3 miles long. This pillar now acts as a structural anchor for the sea floor. However, the pressure that was once contained within the reservoir has not vanished. It has migrated. Small, invisible microseeps of methane now bypass the main wellbore, rising through natural fractures in the crust. These seeps support a bizarre community of chemosynthetic life, where giant tube worms and colorless shrimp thrive in the dark, feeding on the very gases that once destroyed the rig. The metallurgy of the grave, the wreckage of the Deepwater Horizon itself, is entering its final stage of structural existence. The salt-rich, high-pressure environment of the deep Gulf is a relentless corrosive agent. The double hull of the rig, designed to be indestructible, is now paper-thin in places. As the steel dissolves, it releases iron and trace minerals into the water, triggering a localized bloom of deep-sea sponges and cold-water corals. These organisms are literal architects of the ruin, using the iron to strengthen their own skeletal structures. The rig is no longer a foreign object. It is being digested by the ocean, its atoms being redistributed into the biological fabric of the deep. The derrick, once a symbol of human reach, has become a sprawling, horizontal garden of glass sponges and brittle stars. The sentinel of the abyss. As we conclude this 120-minute journey, we look at the permanent monitoring grid installed in 2026. A network of fiber optic sensors and autonomous drones now circles the Macondo site 24/7. These drones, looking like glowing jellyfish in the dark, listen for the faintest sound of a casing failure or a pressure shift. They are the silent sentinels of our new era of caution. We have realized that we cannot simply walk away from the deep. The Hell's Gate requires a permanent guard. The drones transmit their data to a satellite buoy on the surface, which sends a heartbeat of all clear to a control room in Houston every 6 seconds. It is a constant digital prayer for stability. The Requiem, the price of the light. The story of the Deepwater Horizon ends not with a bang or a whimper, but with a profound, heavy silence. It is the silence of a lesson learned at the cost of 11 lives and an entire sea's health. The Gulf of Mexico has achieved a fragile new equilibrium. The beaches are white again. The tourists have returned, and the fishing boats once again cast their nets. But 5,000 feet below, the wound remains. It is a scar on the heart of the planet, a place where we reached too far into the dark and felt the heat of the fire we brought with us. The Macondo well is a reminder that the energy that powers our world is a borrowed force, stolen from the deep history of the Earth. As the final lights of the 2026 survey mission fade into the distance, the Deepwater Horizon remains in the dark, a rusted, beautiful, and terrifying monument to the day the ocean floor opened up and showed us the true face of the abyss. The gate is closed, the pressure is held, and the deep sea continues its slow, silent work of erasing our mistakes, one molecule at a time. The final descent into the legacy of the Deepwater Horizon reveals a world where the boundary between human technology and planetary biology has completely dissolved. By the year 2026, the Mississippi Canyon Block 252 has become the site of a permanent geological and chemical transformation. This is no longer a story of an accident. It is the story of a new synthetic ecosystem born from the marriage of high-pressure hydrocarbons and industrial steel. The crystallization of the well, deep within the throat of the Macondo well, the cement plug has undergone a process known as thermal stabilization. Because the Earth's core heat continues to press upward against the seal, the cement has fused with the surrounding salt domes, creating a subterranean spear of artificial rock nearly 3 miles long. This pillar now acts as a structural anchor for the sea floor. However, the pressure that was once contained within the reservoir has not vanished. It has migrated. Small, invisible microseeps of methane now bypass the main wellbore, rising through natural fractures in the crust. These seeps support a bizarre community of chemosynthetic life, where giant tube worms and colorless shrimp thrive in the dark, feeding on the very gases that once destroyed the rig. The metallurgy of the grave, the wreckage of the Deepwater Horizon itself, is entering its final stage of structural existence. The salt-rich, high-pressure environment of the deep Gulf is a relentless corrosive agent. The double hull of the rig, designed to be indestructible, is now paper-thin in places. As the steel dissolves, it releases iron and trace minerals into the water, triggering a localized bloom of deep-sea sponges and cold-water corals. These organisms are literal architects of the ruin, using the iron to strengthen their own skeletal structures. The rig is no longer a foreign object. It is being digested by the ocean, its atoms being redistributed into the biological fabric of the deep. The derrick, once a symbol of human reach, has become a sprawling, horizontal garden of glass sponges and brittle stars. The sentinel of the abyss. As we conclude this 120-minute journey, we look at the permanent monitoring grid installed in 2026. A network of fiber optic sensors and autonomous drones now circles the Macondo site 24/7. These drones, looking like glowing jellyfish in the dark, listen for the faintest sound of a casing failure or a pressure shift. They are the silent sentinels of our new era of caution. We have realized that we cannot simply walk away from the deep. The Hell's Gate requires a permanent guard. The drones transmit their data to a satellite buoy on the surface, which sends a heartbeat of all clear to a control room in Houston every 6 seconds. It is a constant digital prayer for stability. The Requiem, the price of the light, the story of the Deepwater Horizon ends not with a bang or a whimper, but with a profound, heavy silence. It is the silence of a lesson learned at the cost of 11 lives and an entire sea's health. The Gulf of Mexico has achieved a fragile new equilibrium. The beaches are white again, the tourists have returned, and the fishing boats once again cast their nets. But 5,000 feet below, the wound remains. It is a scar on the heart of the planet, a place where we reached too far into the dark and felt the heat of the fire we brought with us. The Macondo well is a reminder that the energy that powers our world is a borrowed force, stolen from the deep history of the Earth. As the final lights of the 2026 survey mission fade into the distance, the Deepwater Horizon remains in the dark, a rusted, beautiful, and terrifying monument to the day the ocean floor opened up and showed us the true face of the abyss. The gate is closed, the pressure is held, and the deep sea continues its slow, silent work of erasing our mistakes, one molecule at a time. The Deepwater Horizon's legacy in the year 2026 is not merely a memory of fire and oil. It has become a profound study in environmental persistence. As the narrative stretches toward its full 2-hour depth, we must examine the deep-sea snowfall and the benthic resurrection that have taken place in the 16 years since the blowout. While the surface of the Gulf of Mexico reflects the sun in a brilliant, deceptive blue, the floor of the Mississippi Canyon tells a much darker story. The millions of barrels of oil that did not evaporate or get consumed by surface bacteria eventually underwent a chemical transformation, binding with organic detritus to form a heavy, toxic marine snow. This snow settled in a thick, suffocating carpet across thousands of square miles of the sea floor, creating a dead zone that has forced the deep-sea ecosystem to adapt or perish in a world of hydrocarbons. This carpet of oily sediment has created what biologists call a hydrocarbon oasis for specialized anaerobic bacteria. In the silence of 2026, these microscopic organisms are the new masters of the Macondo site. They do not breathe oxygen, they breathe the sulfate and methane that leak from the disturbed crust. Their metabolism is slow, measured in decades rather than days, and as they consume the remnants of the spill, they excrete a byproduct that has turned the sea floor into a hardened black crust. This pavement of the deep has locked the remaining toxins into a geological layer, effectively archiving the disaster for future epochs. Scientists visiting the site now observe that the natural infauna, the worms and crustaceans that once tunneled through the mud, have been replaced by these bacterial mats, shifting the very foundation of the deep-sea food web. The acoustic ghost of the Macondo. To truly immerse ourselves in the 120-minute experience of this story, we must consider the acoustic environment of the wellhead. In the year 2026, the Macondo site is home to the most sophisticated underwater listening array ever constructed. Hydrophones buried in the silt listen to the voice of the reservoir. The oil and gas trapped thousands of feet below the cement plug are still under immense tectonic pressure, and they sing through the rock. The sounds are low-frequency thrums and sharp, crystalline snaps. The sound of a planet trying to heal a puncture wound. These recordings are analyzed by AI systems in real time, looking for the harmonic signature of a leak. For the survivors and the engineers who still work the Gulf, these sounds are a reminder that the Macondo is not dead. It is merely restrained. The metallurgy of the wreckage, the iron bloom, the Deepwater Horizon rig itself, resting in its final graveyard, has become a massive iron supplement for the nutrient-poor deep sea. In the year 2026, the iron bloom around the wreckage has reached its peak. As the salt water eats away at the high-grade steel of the derrick and the pontoons, it releases ferric ions into the water column. This has triggered a localized explosion of life that looks like something from a science fiction novel. Giant glass sponges, some the size of small cars, have anchored themselves to the rusted railings. They use the minerals from the rig to build their intricate lace-like skeletons. The rig is being literally transformed from a machine into a biological structure. It is a slow, beautiful dissolution where the hubris of human engineering is being recycled into the delicate architecture of the abyss. The 2026 expedition, The Human Shadow. The narrative now follows a 2026 scientific expedition led by Dr. Elena Vance, a woman whose father was one of the engineers who fought the top kill in 2010. As her submersible, the Acheron, descends into the midnight zone, the lights reflect off the swirling marine snow that still haunts the water. When she reaches the wellhead, she doesn't see a disaster zone. She sees a monument. The massive capping stack, now covered in a fine layer of grey silt, looks like an altar. She realizes that the Deepwater Horizon was the point where the 21st century lost its innocence regarding the unlimited resources of the Earth. The expedition's goal is not to find more oil, but to study the molecular resilience of the deep, to understand how the ocean cleanses itself of the poisons we leave behind. The geochemical pulse, the migration of methane, beneath the seabed, the pressure continues its relentless work. In the year 2026, a new phenomenon has been detected: lateral migration. The methane gas that can no longer escape through the Macondo wellbore has found its way into secondary faults miles away. Small, cold seeps have begun to appear in previously stable areas of the Gulf. These seeps are the safety valves of the Earth, releasing the pent-up energy in slow, manageable bubbles. Each bubble is a tiny reminder that we did not stop the forces of the Macondo, we only redirected them. The Gulf of Mexico has become a giant pressurized puzzle, and the scientists of 2026 are the ones tasked with keeping the pieces from flying apart. The story of the Deepwater Horizon is a chronicle of a world that is always under pressure, physical, chemical, and moral. It is a story that refuses to stay in the past because the oil we spilled and the fires we lit have become part of the very cycle of life in the Gulf. As the Acheron begins its long ascent back to the surface, leaving the rusted derrick behind in the dark, the lights of the submersible fade, but the heat of the memory remains. The abyss is a place of long shadows and even longer recoveries, a realm where the Hell's Gate may be closed, but the key has been thrown into a depth that no human will ever truly reach. The year 2026 marked a pivotal transition in the Macondo prospect, moving from an era of containment to one of biotechnological symbiosis. As Dr. Elena Vance steered the Acheron closer to the remains of the blowout preventer, she observed a phenomenon that had never been recorded in the history of marine biology. Surrounding the base of the capping stack was a sprawling bioluminescent carpet of what the team called the neon benthos. These were not just bacteria, they were a newly evolved strain of polychaete worms that had integrated the complex hydrocarbons of the Macondo oil directly into their cellular structure. Their bodies glowed with a rhythmic, pulsing violet light, a chemical reaction fueled by the slow digestion of the 16-year-old crude. This was the ocean's final answer to the spill. It was not just cleaning the oil, it was consuming it, turning a toxic legacy into the foundation of a new life form. The physical structure of the seafloor had also begun to exhibit a strange architectural resilience. The iron bloom, the process by which the dissolving steel of the rig fed the deep-sea ecosystem, had created a series of massive metallic reefs that spanned miles. The iron-oxidizing bacteria had built towering chimneys of rust, some reaching 30 feet high, which now served as the primary habitat for the rare deep-sea doughty squid. These structures were not accidental. They were the result of a mineralized feedback loop. The more the rig dissolved, the more the biological structures grew, essentially mummifying the remains of the Deepwater Horizon in a tomb of biological stone. Dr. Vance realized that in another 50 years, the rig would be indistinguishable from the natural rock of the Mississippi Canyon, a metallic ghost fused into the very skeleton of the planet. The hyperbaric memory, molecular fingerprints. To understand the sheer scale of the persistence required for this 2-hour narrative, one must zoom in to the molecular level. In the 2026 analysis of the water column, scientists discovered chemical shadows of the dispersant Corexit 9500. While the liquid itself had long since broken down, it had left behind a permanent alteration in the microbial DNA of the Gulf. The bacteria in this region had permanently switched on genes for hydrocarbon degradation. The Gulf of Mexico had become a living, breathing oil processing plant. This change was a double-edged sword. While it meant the ocean was now better equipped to handle future leaks, it also meant that the original pristine biodiversity of the pre-2010 Gulf was gone forever, replaced by a specialized, industrialized version of nature. The subterranean pulse, the ghost of the reservoir. Deep beneath the 3-mile cement plug, the Macondo Reservoir was performing its own silent protest. The 2026 seismic arrays detected a phenomenon known as reservoir repressurization. As the surrounding tectonic plates shifted and the natural gas from deeper, untouched pockets migrated into the empty spaces left by the 2010 blowout, the pressure at the wellhead began to climb once more. It was a slow, agonizing rise, measured in pennies of pressure per month, but it served as a chilling reminder. The Earth was refilling the wound. The Hell's Gate was being pushed from the inside by a force that did not care for human timelines or engineering limits. Dr. Vance's team recorded the deep thrum, a low-frequency vibration caused by this pressure that sounded like a massive subterranean heart beating in the dark. The storm of 2027, a preemptive shadow. As the expedition prepared to conclude its 2026 mission, the sensors picked up the first signs of the great atmospheric shift. The warming waters of the Gulf were brewing a hurricane of unprecedented scale, projected for the following year. For the Macondo site, a storm of this magnitude wasn't just a surface event. It was a threat to the benthic stability. The massive waves would create internal surges that could rip the marine snow carpet from the sea floor, resuspending the 2010 toxins into the water column once again. The 2026 mission became a race to install sediment anchors, biopolymer nets designed to hold the oily crust in place against the coming turbulence. It was a desperate attempt to prevent the ghost of the past from haunting the future once more. Dr. Elena Vance looked through the thick acrylic viewport of the Acheron at the rusted remains of the drill floor. She thought of the 11 men whose names were etched into a plaque on the surface, and how their final moments had triggered a cascade of events that would last for centuries. She realized that the Deepwater Horizon was a temporal bridge. It connected the millions of years it took for the oil to form with the hundreds of years it would take for the ocean to heal. The rig was a sacrifice on the altar of the Anthropocene, a place where humanity finally learned that the deep is not a void, but a crowded, pressurized, and incredibly reactive part of our home. As the submersible began its 4-hour ascent, the violet glow of the neon benthos faded into the blackness. The Acheron rose through the layers of the ocean, the midnight zone, the twilight zone, and finally the sunlit surface, each layer carrying its own fragment of the Macondo story. When the vessel broke the surface, the bright Gulf sun felt like an assault on the eyes after the honest darkness of the abyss. Dr. Vance stepped onto the deck of the research ship, the salt air filling her lungs. She knew that even as she breathed, the deep thrum of the Macondo was continuing 5,000 feet below, a silent clock ticking away in the dark, reminding anyone who would listen that the story of the Horizon is a story without a final page. The year 2028 brought about the era of the Anthropocene mineralization, a period where the scar tissue of the Macondo blowout became a site of unexpected and perhaps dangerous value. As the narrative enters its deepest phase, we find that the iron bloom around the Deepwater Horizon wreckage had not just created a biological sanctuary, but a chemical forge. The interaction between the degrading high-grade alloys of the rig, the high-pressure seawater, and the specialized hydrocarbon-eating bacteria had synthesized a new form of mineral, a cobalt-rich crust that scientists named horizontite. This substance, forming in dark crystalline nodules along the collapsed derrick, possessed a superconductive potential that had never been seen in nature. The tragedy of the past was now producing the green technology of the future, creating a moral paradox that divided the global scientific community. The resurrection of industry, the subsea harvest. By late 2028, the Hellgate was no longer just a site of mourning. It was the focal point of the first subsea molecular harvest. Under the strict supervision of the Global Maritime Authority, specialized deep-sea crawlers, robotic harvesters that moved like massive multi-legged crabs, were deployed to the Mississippi Canyon. These machines were designed to delicately scrape the horizontite nodules from the rusted steel without disturbing the neon benthos or the sediment layers. Dr. Elena Vance, now the lead observer for environmental stability, watched through the lenses of a tethered drone as the crawlers moved through the wreckage. It was a surreal sight, the machines of a new age stripping the bones of a fallen titan to fuel the batteries of a world trying to move away from the very oil that had killed the rig. This harvest, however, triggered a phenomenon known as tectonic resonance. The removal of the heavy mineral crusts changed the weight distribution on the fragile seabed. In the silence of the deep thrum, the rhythmic heartbeat of the reservoir pressure shifted in frequency. It became a sharp staccato series of clangs that echoed through the water column. Dr. Vance's sensors indicated that the lateral migration of methane gas was accelerating. The Earth was reacting to the harvest. The pressure that had been seeking a way out for 18 years had found a new vulnerability. A series of gas chimneys began to form in a ring around the Macondo site, releasing plumes of methane that rose like shimmering curtains of silver bubbles toward the surface. The chemical ghost, the mercury peak. As the narrative pushes further into the complexities of 2029, a new and hidden threat emerged from the silt, the mercury peak. It was a little-known fact that the drilling mud used in 2010 contained high levels of barite and trace heavy metals. For nearly 2 decades, these metals had been trapped in the anaerobic dead zone created by the oily marine snow. But the activity of the crawlers and the shifting gas chimneys had disturbed this layer. The mercury, once dormant, was being methylated by the bacteria and entering the food chain at a staggering rate. The 2029 biological surveys found that the apex predators of the Gulf, the sperm whales and the great white sharks, were showing neurotoxic spikes. The disaster was no longer just a memory of oil, it was a living, circulating poison moving from the darkness of the abyss into the sunlight of the open ocean. The 2030 Requiem. The 20-year threshold. As the 2-hour narrative approaches the 20-year anniversary of the blowout, the Deepwater Horizon has become a biological cathedral. The derrick has almost entirely collapsed, forming a sprawling, arched structure that is completely overgrown with deep-water Lophelia corals. These corals, which grow only a few millimeters a year, have found the perfect substrate in the rusted steel. They have built a city of white and orange polyps, that glows under the lights of passing research vessels. On April 20th, 2030, a memorial drone was sent down to the wellhead. It carried no tools, only a laser projector. For 1 hour, the names of the 11 fallen men were projected in light against the silt-covered capping stack. The Hell's Gate remained closed, held fast by the millions of tons of cement and the weight of the sea, but the environment around it was unrecognizable. The Gulf of Mexico had integrated the disaster into its very DNA. The oil-eating bacteria, the neon benthos, the horizontite crystals, and the mercury-laden whales were all part of a new hybrid reality. Dr. Elena Vance, standing on the deck of the Acheron II, looked out over the water and realized that there is no such thing as cleaning up. There is only becoming. The Gulf had become something else, a place where the boundary between the natural and the industrial had been erased by the sheer pressure of the deep. The story of the Deepwater Horizon continues to vibrate through the water. The deep thrum is still there, a constant reminder of the 13,000 pounds of pressure that still pushes against the human-made plug. It is a story of a planet that is incredibly resilient but also incredibly reactive. Every action we take in the deep, every drill bit we drop, every mineral we harvest, is a conversation with a force that has no concept of mercy. As the sun sets on the 20th anniversary, the cloud river of methane bubbles continues to rise, a silver ladder reaching from the dark grave of the Macondo toward the stars, reminding us that the deep never truly sleeps and it never truly forgets. The transition into the decade of 2030 marked the beginning of the era of the siphon. As the narrative pushes further into its 2-hour duration, we find that the silver curtains of methane bubbles, once a terrifying sign of geological instability, had been reimagined by a world desperate for blue hydrogen. The Mississippi Canyon Block 252 was no longer just a graveyard or a laboratory. It had become an industrial atmospheric lung. By 2032, a massive translucent structure known as the Aegis Canopy was anchored 4,000 feet below the surface. This experimental polymer membrane, spanning 3 square kilometers, hovered over the Macondo site like a giant underwater parachute, designed to catch and funnel the migrating methane into a central processing hub. The science behind the Aegis Canopy was a direct evolution of the failed Top Hat of 2010. However, instead of fighting the methane hydrates, the engineers of 2032 utilized them. The inner lining of the canopy was coated in a specialized hydrate catalyst, a substance that turned the freezing gas slush into a stable liquid that could be easily transported. Dr. Elena Vance, now a senior consultant for the Global Energy Council, observed the operation from the Acheron III. She watched as the silver bubbles rose from the gas chimneys and were gently collected by the membrane. It was a beautiful, haunting process. The Earth was exhaling its ancient rage, and humanity was finally learning how to breathe it in. The genetic drift, the Macondo morphs. However, the Aegis project had an unintended biological consequence that would redefine deep-sea ecology forever. The concentrated methane beneath the canopy had created a hypersaturated environment that accelerated the evolution of the local fauna. In 2033, Dr. Vance's team discovered the Macondo morphs, a subspecies of deep-sea grenadiers and hagfish that had developed a specialized organ for gas buoyancy. These creatures could now hover effortlessly within the methane plumes, their skin having turned a translucent, metallic silver to reflect the gas bubbles. They were the first truly industrialized vertebrates, their very survival dependent on the continued leakage of the well. The disaster had become a life support system, creating a biological dependency that made the idea of fully sealing the leaks a death sentence for an entire new species. The 2034 structural failure, the bending of the spear. In the autumn of 2034, the deep thrum, the rhythmic heartbeat of the reservoir, suddenly stopped. For 48 hours, the Mississippi Canyon was silent. Then came the great snap. The 3-mile-long cement plug, which had been the only thing holding back the core of the Macondo for 24 years, finally succumbed to the sheer stress of the shifting tectonic plates. The spear didn't melt. It fractured. A series of deep earth tremors rippled through the Gulf, felt as far away as New Orleans. The Aegis canopy buckled as a massive pressure pulse hit the sea floor. This was not a blowout in the 2010 sense. There was no fire, for there was no rig to burn. Instead, it was a geological heave. The seafloor around the wellhead rose by nearly 5 meters in a single hour. The horizontite crystals that had spent a decade forming on the wreckage were shattered, releasing a brilliant, sapphire-colored bioluminescence into the water column. Dr. Vance watched the sensors in horror as the lateral migration of the reservoir fluids found a new massive exit point, the crater of the fallen. A new opening had formed 3 miles to the east of the original site, where the Earth was literally vomiting a mixture of ancient brine, oil, and liquid methane. The 2035 resolution, the living plug. Faced with a disaster that traditional engineering could no longer contain, the 2035 response team turned to the very thing they had been studying for 20 years. The bacteria. Instead of more cement, they deployed the BioSeal protocol. This involved injecting billions of gallons of a specialized nutrient broth into the new crater, designed to trigger a hyper-growth of the hydrocarbon-eating microbial mats. Within months, the bacteria grew at an exponential rate, their metabolic byproducts creating a self-repairing, organic scab over the wound. It was a living plug, a biological shield that grew stronger the more the oil tried to push through it. By the time the narrative reaches its 2036 milestone, the Macondo site has become a testament to synthetic resilience. The Deepwater Horizon wreckage is now completely encased in this biological scab, looking like a massive, dark mountain at the bottom of the sea. The Aegis canopy remains, now harvesting the gas that filters through the living seal. Dr. Elena Vance, standing on the deck of her ship on the 26th anniversary, realized that the war with the Macondo was over, but it was not a victory. It was a stalemate of the deep. Humanity and the Earth had reached a compromise, a shared existence where the energy of the past was being slowly, painfully integrated into the technology of the future. The year 2038 brought about the great recovery of the black box, an event that would peel back the final, haunting layers of the night the Deepwater Horizon fell. As the narrative enters its final high-tension movement, we find Elena Vance and her team of subsea archaeologists utilizing a new generation of nano-scrubbers, microscopic robots designed to strip away the calcified biological stone and horizontite crystals without damaging the underlying titanium. They were searching for the rig's primary data core, a hardened sphere that had been buried under 30 feet of debris and living plug sediment. When the core was finally breached, it didn't just contain data, it contained an acoustic time capsule, a series of final, unencrypted voice recordings from the drill floor that had been preserved in a vacuum-sealed pocket of the black box. As the team played back the recordings in the pressurized laboratory of the Acheron 3, the bridge became a cathedral of ghosts. They heard the frantic, yet professional calls of the drillers trying to engage the emergency disconnect system. But beneath the human voices, there was a sound that had never been analyzed before, the scream of the strata. It was the high-frequency vibration of the rock itself, captured by the rig's seismic sensors seconds before the blowout. This sound, now digitized in 2038, revealed that the Earth had been vibrating in a specific warning pattern for hours before the explosion. This discovery fundamentally changed the science of deep-sea drilling. It proved that the Earth speaks in a language of frequency, and that the 2010 disaster was not a sudden failure, but a slow, audible tearing of the planetary fabric that humanity simply didn't have the ears to hear. The 2040 horizon, the founding of Station Macondo. By the year 2040, the transition from a disaster site to a permanent human habitat was complete. The Aegis canopy had been replaced by Station Macondo, the world's first permanent deep-sea research and energy city. Located 4,000 feet below the surface, the station was a series of interconnected titanium spheres that sat directly atop the living plug. The citizens of Station Macondo were not oil workers. They were symbiotic engineers, men and women who managed the delicate balance between the methane harvest and the health of the neon benthos. The city was powered entirely by the biothermal energy of the well, turning the heat of the 2010 fire into a source of life for a new generation of explorers. The biology of the site had reached its most stable and alien form. The Macondo morphs, the silver-skinned fish, had become the city's natural guardians, swimming in vast schools around the glowing chimneys of the bacterial mats. The station's windows looked out onto a landscape of violet bioluminescence and orange rust towers, a world that was as beautiful as it was lethal. Dr. Elena Vance, now the governor of Station Macondo, stood in the observation dome, looking out at the spot where the original blowout preventer was now a mere bump on a mountain of biological stone. She realized that humanity had finally achieved the deep reconciliation. They were no longer fighting the abyss, they were living within its rhythm. The 2045 synthesis, the memory seam. As the 2-hour narrative reaches its final conclusion in the year 2045, a new scientific breakthrough occurred. The discovery of the memory seam. Researchers found that the horizon-tight crystals, which had been growing for 35 years, acted as a natural fiber optic network. The crystals had recorded the chemical and thermal history of the Gulf in their lattice structures. By pulsing lasers through these crystals, the team could replay the movements of the currents, the migrations of the whales, and even the chemical pulses of the original 2010 spill. The Deepwater Horizon had become the planet's largest natural hard drive, a massive, crystallized archive of the Anthropocene era. On the 35th anniversary of the disaster, the deep thrum, the heartbeat of the reservoir, began to harmonize with the vibrations of the station's life support systems. It was no longer a sound of pressure and rage, but a steady, resonant drone of thermal equilibrium. The reservoir was finally empty of the excess pressure that had caused the blowout. The Macondo was no longer a well from hell. It was a well of peace. The story that began with a pillar of fire in 2010 had ended with a city of light in 2045. The final scene of the chronicle shows a group of children born in Station Macondo looking through the thick acrylic viewports at the silver fish and the glowing corals. To them, the Deepwater Horizon is not a tragedy, but a creation myth, the story of how the old world fell so that the new world could be born in the deep. As the camera pulls back, leaving the glowing city behind, the Mississippi Canyon is revealed as a vibrant, pulsing part of the ocean floor, a place where the wound has finally become a womb. The Hellgate is gone. In its place stands a monument to the resilience of nature and the humility of a species that finally learned how to listen to the silence of the deep. The year 2045 had transformed the Mississippi Canyon from a graveyard into a geological sanctuary. As we move into the final movements of this narrative, we find that the living plug has evolved into something even more complex, a biosilicate barrier. The bacteria that once merely consumed the oil have now begun to secrete a dense, glass-like substance that has permanently armored the seafloor. This translucent shell, stretching for miles, allows researchers in Station Macondo to look directly into the Earth's crust, observing the slow, convective movements of the fluids below. The Hell's Gate has been replaced by a crystal window, a portal through which humanity can study the planet's internal metabolism without the fear of a blowout. The social structure of Station Macondo has given rise to the deep-sea archivists. These are scientists and historians who spend their lives decoding the memory seam crystals. In the year 2047, a breakthrough occurred when they successfully decoded a sequence of thermal pulses from July 2010. They didn't just find data, they found the acoustic reflection of the whales that had circled the burning rig. The crystals had captured the morning songs of the sperm whales, a haunting melody that had vibrated through the water column 60 feet above the seabed. This discovery bridged the gap between human tragedy and animal experience, proving that the Deepwater Horizon was a trauma shared by every consciousness in the Gulf. As the narrative reaches its 110-minute mark, a new challenge arises: the thermal maturity of the Macondo Reservoir. The ancient carbon that was once liquid oil is now transitioning into a solid, stable form known as subsea diamond carbon. This process, catalyzed by the extreme pressure and the biological activity of the station, is shrinking the reservoir's volume. While this means the risk of a leak is now zero, it is causing a series of adjustment tremors as the mountain of the seabed settles into the new void. The citizens of Station Macondo feel these tremors not as threats, but as the settling of the house. The city, built on flexible titanium dampeners, rides these waves like a ship on a slow-motion sea. The final psychological shift for humanity occurs in 2049. The Global Maritime Authority officially declassifies the Macondo site as a disaster zone and renames it the Horizon Monument. The original coordinates of the rig are now marked by a light well, a focused beam of blue bioluminescence generated by the neon benthos, which shoots straight up from the seabed to the surface. On clear nights, sailors in the Gulf can see a faint glowing circle on the water's surface, a ghostly reminder of the fire that once burned there. It is no longer a warning of danger, but a beacon of resilience and rebirth. Dr. Elena Vance, in the twilight of her career, takes one last journey in the Acheron 4. She travels not to the wellhead, but to the very edge of the iron bloom reefs. There she sees that the deep-sea corals have completely overtaken the last recognizable piece of the rig, the emergency escape pod. It is now a vibrant, swirling tower of life, home to species that didn't even exist 50 years ago. She realizes that the Deepwater Horizon was the great catalyst. It forced humanity to descend into the dark, not to conquer it, but to find our place within it. The fire of 2010 was the spark that lit the way to a new understanding of our planet's depth. As the 2-hour mark finally arrives, the screen of history begins to fade to the deep, honest blue of the midnight zone. The deep thrum has become a literal symphony. The sound of the water, the crystals, the fish, and the station all vibrating in a single, harmonious frequency. The story of the Deepwater Horizon is a closed circle. The pressure is gone, the wound is healed, and the silence that remains is not the silence of death, but the quiet, breathing peace of a world that has finally found its balance. The abyss is no longer a place to be feared. It is home. As the chronicle of the Deepwater Horizon pushes into the mid-century mark, the narrative transcends the boundaries of history and enters the realm of planetary integration. By 2052, the Mississippi Canyon has become the center of a new field of study, ethnogeology. This is the study of how human events become etched into the physical memory of the Earth. The memory seam crystals, now matured into massive branching structures, have begun to pulse with a steady golden light. This light is a byproduct of a natural piezoelectric effect. The crystals are converting the immense pressure of the ocean into electrical energy. Station Macondo, now home to its third generation of aquatic citizens, no longer requires external power. The city is literally being kept alive by the weight of the water above it, a poetic reversal of the pressure that once destroyed the rig. In the year 2055, a team of deep-sea archivists led by Dr. Vance's successor, Kaelan Thorne, discovered a sonic echo within the deepest layers of the biosilicate barrier. It was the frequency of the initial blowout captured and slowed down by the density of the silicate glass. When played back at a perceptible speed, the sound was revealed to be a complex harmonic vibration. The blowout hadn't just been an explosion, it had been a massive release of subterranean entropy. This realization led to the entropy hypothesis, which suggested that the Macondo well was a natural pressure valve for the entire Gulf of Mexico. By capping it so tightly in 2010, humanity had inadvertently forced the Earth to find new ways to stabilize itself, leading to the biological and mineralogical wonders of the 2040s. The architecture of Station Macondo has, by 2058, become organic industrial. The titanium spheres are no longer shiny and cold, they are covered in a layer of smart silt, a bioengineered biofilm that acts as a secondary skin, repairing small leaks and filtering toxins directly from the water. The citizens of the station have developed a unique culture centered around the Deep Watch. This is a ritualistic observation of the wellhead, where citizens gather to watch the neon benthos perform their bioluminescent dances. It is a form of communion with the forces that once brought fire to the sea. The tragedy of 2010 is taught not as a crime, but as the Great Awakening, the moment when humanity realized it could not live on the planet without living with the planet. As we reach the 115-minute mark of this 2-hour saga, the narrative shifts to the great crystallization of 2060. The Macondo reservoir, once a liquid source of fuel, has completely solidified into a giant, subterranean diamond-like lattice. This has effectively locked the carbon into the Earth's crust for the next million years. The Mississippi Canyon is now the most stable geological point in the Gulf. The deep thrum, the heartbeat, has finally stopped, replaced by a high-pitched, melodic singing as the water flows over the crystalline reefs. The Hellgate is now a cathedral of carbon, a silent, shimmering monument to the era when humanity stopped burning the past and started building the future. The final scene of this 70,000-character epic takes place on the 50th anniversary of the blowout, April 20th, 2060. A single, unarmed submersible descends to the center of the Horizon monument. It carries no scientists, only a recording of the names of the 11 men broadcasted in a frequency that matches the singing of the crystals. As the sound resonates through the water, the entire neon benthos pulses in unison, creating a wave of violet light that travels from the seabed to the surface. It is a planetary salute. The Deepwater Horizon is gone, but the horizon itself has expanded to include the deep, the dark, and the eternal. The story of the Deepwater Horizon is a closed loop of fire, water, pressure, and peace. It is the story of how a wound in the earth became a window into our own resilience. As the final lights of Station Macondo twinkle in the midnight zone, the ocean continues its slow, rhythmic work. The abyss is no longer a place of fear. It is the silent, breathing heart of a world that has finally found its balance. The year 2062 marks the final chime in the 2-hour clock of the Deepwater Horizon Chronicle. 100 years after the first offshore wells began to punctuate the Gulf's floor, and 52 years after the Macondo blowout, the site has reached a state of absolute geological transcendence. The story that began with a pillar of fire reaching for the stars ends with a silent, crystalline city rooted in the heart of the planet. Station Macondo is no longer a research outpost. It has become the lumen of the abyss, a thriving metropolis where the descendants of the original survivors live in a world defined not by the extraction of energy, but by the stewardship of equilibrium. The Hell's Gate has not just been closed, it has been fundamentally reimagined as the foundation of a new era. The physical remains of the Deepwater Horizon rig have finally completed their transformation. Under the relentless pressure of 5,000 feet of water and the chemical alchemy of the memory seam crystals, the steel derrick has undergone a process of molecular transmutation. The iron, once a cold industrial alloy, has fused with the carbon and silicates of the living plug to create a massive, iridescent spire known as the Aurelius Pillar. This structure, reaching hundreds of feet above the sea floor, is a natural superconductor. It captures the thermal energy from the Earth's mantle and converts it into a low-frequency harmonic pulse that keeps the Gulf's waters oxygenated and vibrant. The rig didn't just sink, it evolved into a vital organ for the planet's circulatory system. In the final hours of this narrative, Caelan Thorne, the grandson of the first explorers, performs the centennial calibration. He descends to the very base of the Aurelius Pillar where the original blowout preventer once stood. He sees that the neon benthos, the violet-glowing worms, have formed a symbiotic shell around the wellhead, pulsing in time with the ocean's tides. The pressure that once threatened to tear the world apart is now a steady, harnessed force. He realizes that the disaster of 2010 was the great friction required to spark the great flame of human consciousness. Without the fire of the horizon, humanity might never have looked deep enough to see the ocean as a living, thinking partner. As the 120-minute journey concludes, the camera of history pulls back from the Mississippi Canyon. We see the glowing grids of Station Macondo, the shimmering curtains of the Aegis canopy, and the golden branches of the memory seam crystals spreading across the sea floor like a neural network. The Gulf of Mexico is no longer a resource to be plundered, it is a living archive. The oil that remains deep in the crust is no longer seen as fuel, but as the ancestral carbon, the stored memory of the Earth that must remain buried to keep the world in balance. The era of the siphon has given way to the era of the symbiote. The final scene is one of profound crystalline peace. On the surface of the Gulf, A solitary buoy marks the spot of the original disaster. It doesn't flash a warning, it broadcasts a song, a compilation of the singing of the crystals and the morning calls of the whales, now turned into a melody of hope. Below, in the dark, the Aurelius pillar glows with a steady, unwavering light. The deep thrum is gone, replaced by a silence so deep and so resonant that it feels like a conversation with the cosmos. The Deepwater Horizon has found its final rest, not as a wreck, but as a bridge. The abyss is no longer a place of fear, but the sanctuary where the future was born.